Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. I'm Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become better expressions of who we are.
I'm Lee Pepper, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
If this is your first time here, thanks for listening. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry, and this is The Path to Authenticity. Episode 230 for December 31st, 2025. You know, one of my goals with this podcast was to bring brilliant thinkers who could offer their unique perspectives on personal growth. And Lee Pepper is a clear example of that vision. Lee's a U.S. Army veteran. He was the youngest staffer on Ross Perot's presidential campaigns. He's a highly successful marketing executive and now an author. He's not only incredibly competent and creative, but also just a genuinely interesting guy. Lee's had a long and impactful career in behavioral health. He has long been a key innovator and dedicated ally to the recovery community. In this conversation, we discuss his book, Never Outmatched, and its application of military strategies to leadership and marketing. Lee shares some of his firsthand experiences working with Ross Perot, as well as his philosophy on building transformational organizations that change the course of people's lives. You can find links in the show notes to Lee's book, as well as his TEDx talk on the same subject matter. So I hope you all have a happy and prosperous 2026. Here you go. Hope you enjoy it. Lee Pepper. Lee, it's good to see you, man.
Great to be here with you, Tom.
One of the things I thought about immediately when I invited you on the podcast is when I created this, I wanted to be able to sort of marshal the resources I've garnered in my career in addiction treatment, but not have it only be about addiction. And I've met a lot of authors over the years, a lot of brilliant therapists, and I kind of been kicking myself for not thinking of asking you a long time ago. I admire you. You obviously are someone who is very competent at what he's doing, and you're a very creative person, and we've gotten a chance to spend a little bit of time together over the years, but not a lot. So I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to learn more about you. And I guess another thing I'll say is that For some reason lately in my Instagram feed, I've been seeing these Ross Perot clips. And one of the things I always found really interesting about you is that you were a part of his campaigns. And I'm a guy, my first two presidential elections, I voted for Ross Perot. So I want to hear about that a little bit too. But why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about who you are and where you're from, and so they can kind of get a feel for, what I'm saying about just really interesting guy you are.
Well, Tom, I'm so thrilled to be with you today. And I love your opening monologue where you reference marshaling the forces that you need. And what a great kind of segue, since my book is about the military strategies that I employed in my corporate marketing career. And I think so much of some of the things that people will read really connect in with recovery. And I think that's really fascinating because I'm not a person that's in recovery personally. And it's through people like you, Steve Lee, who you and I were mentioning earlier, and John Southworth, and so many other people that welcomed me in and trained me and poured into me. And it's really, changed my life. And I think made me an ally and an advocate, for those that are in recovery. And so a little bit about my background. I mean, I was the son of an Army officer. So I grew up an Army brat, military family. We moved around, quite a few times. And I was lucky that it was mainly in the Southeast. And my brothers and I, we kind of got dropped off into a different city. I got dropped off in Knoxville, Tennessee when I was a senior in high school. And I stayed and went to college at UT. And I enlisted in the Army when I was still in college. And then I served in the Army Reserves. And what was fascinating was I was very involved in politics as a young man. My dad and my mom used to drop me off when I was 12 and 13 years old at the campaign headquarters for different local politicians. And I would lick envelopes and hand out bumper stickers and make phone calls. This is back in the 80s. And I was that kind of kid. I was a political science nerd. So I graduated in political science, and I think I was maybe the only person in my graduating class at UT that got a job working in politics, and I got the chance to work for Ross Perot. And I had been a volunteer on the 92 election. As soon as I graduated in the spring of 93, they hired me, and they moved Jennifer and I out to Dallas, and I worked for his community action group called United We Stand, which was the precursor to his 96 election and starting a third party called the Reform Party. So I was his youngest campaign staffer. And then after that election, he took a handful of us to Perot Systems, which was his IT services company that he had created after he had sold EDS. And so that's where I kind of moved into more IT. So how does somebody with a political science degree get into IT? And I always joke with my information science friends that political science, I had the hard science degree. Of course, that always gets humorous. But I took advantage of every bit of training that Perot Systems offered. And I was fortunate that the internet was just starting to blossom. This is in the late 90s. I took a lot of project management, got certified in project management, worked on a mainframe COBOL IDMS health hospital back office system. So, I mean, this is going back old school, big data centers. And I just always raised my hand. I wanted to learn the business. I wanted to understand what was going on. So my first day working in the data center, I was hanging tapes because back then that's what you did. And I was never, there was never anything that I wasn't willing to roll up my sleeves and do. And I think that that fits in well with the recovery journey. Like you have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and do whatever it takes. And I find my path has been there's been a lot of metaphors that relate to recovery, which is maybe why people like you and a lot of other people I've befriended, like we always kind of have these similar metaphors. Mine were just in a little bit different industry, so to speak. But I was fortunate that Ross bought a company in Nashville. So I was able to move back to Tennessee when my son was 1 year old. Miles was 1 year old. We moved back. My wife's artist. She's a college professor. So she was able to find a job working at David Lipscomb University. And now she's at Belmont. So everything kind of aligned. And I was there at the company that Ross bought for about a year. And I really just felt this itch entrepreneurial itch, and everything was going crazy with the internet. And there was a digital music company that was starting in Nashville. So you're in Nashville, you got to work
Hmm.
at music, right?
Or at
So
least take a crack at it, right?
yeah, that's what it was. It was I took my chance. I got up to plate. We struck out. We ran out of money after a couple of years, but it was a great experience. I learned so much at the advent of digital marketing at that point and social media. Like we were still working at MySpace, creating pages for bands on MySpace. But again, I rolled up my sleeves. I hung out at music studios. I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand what you did at a label. And then I was fortunate to have made some really good connections. And as that was winding down, I went to interview at Foundation Recovery Network as their first
Hmm.
CIO. And I was not really interested in doing help desk, servers, printers. Like that wasn't really my interest. But back then, digital marketing still was in the home of the CTO or the CIO. So I saw the future and where I wanted to be. So I jumped at the chance, and then I became their CIO. I became their CMO, and then we were off to the races. And that's where I think you and I got connected, and I met so many wonderful people. And that's been my life since 2008. Has been in the recovery space, and I always felt that I was innovating, that I was always pushing the envelope. I was applying things in other industries to our industry, and always trying to push because at the end of the day, we are not selling widgets. We are making transformations in people's lives. So a lot of what I write about and talk about still today is that we're not transactional. We have to be transformational in our approach. So that's a lot of my consulting, my training that I do with admission centers. It's you got to be transformational because that is what we're trying to do with people who are seeking
Yeah,
recovery.
I love that. And one of the things I wonder about, and I've been around long enough to remember that Foundations was really the first agency that talked about dual diagnosis. That was not like a common term until I think they got the URL dualdiagnosis.org. And they had a facility
Yes.
in Memphis that is called something else now. I can't remember what it was called.
It's actually closed now. It was called La Paloma. Then we renamed it the Oaks at La Paloma. And, Tom, you're right, because back then with dual diagnosis, it was one of these opportunities. In Tennessee, you can have a treatment program that is dually licensed. It can be licensed for substance abuse and it can be licensed for mental health. It's not like that in
Mm-hmm.
every state. So it was kind of this really special moment where the founders of foundations, they were a nonprofit, and then they switched to for-profit and got some private equity sponsors and were able to buy La Paloma. It was a great opportunity to actually put both together, whereas they had traditionally been
So
separated.
I wonder, did you know that that opportunity existed when you took that position?
No, I did not understand the
Yeah.
space. I was fortunate growing up that I don't have the gene, and I really was not around. Probably because I was in a military family, I really was not exposed to the things that most Americans are exposed to when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
drugs and alcohol. Now, they were around our high school, but it just wasn't something that was um, that I saw on a regular basis like most Americans do. So my interest in foundations was it was healthcare, which I had worked at Pro Systems for a number of years, and it was the opportunity to work at the advent of website development, of social media. That's where I knew that I wanted to be in that space. And then I just poured myself into learning. Listen, I started going to open meetings, Tom, at the Brentwood United Methodist Church in Brentwood. Who does that? I do that. I want to be there. I want to know what's going on. I think that's why people like John Southworth and Ken Seeley and Eric McLaughlin, they took a liking to me because I was going to be there with them. And I wanted to learn. I wanted to experience it myself. John used to always laugh at me and say, well, he would introduce me and say, Lee's not admitting to an addiction, but we're
Right,
still
right.
working on him.
Well, it's funny. It's such an interesting world, the world of addiction treatment and recovery. And you and I both, I mean, first of all, one of the things that I talk about when it comes to treating addiction is it's like a lot of healthcare, very much a story of the haves and the have-nots. And you and I have been part of the world that people with the haves can obtain really good treatment. But
Yes.
most people in this world find their way there because they have an issue with the substance or substances. And there's almost like, I don't want to say there's a bias, but there probably is some kind of bias. And it really can kind of feel like at times, if you don't have it, you don't get it, right? So when you meet
Mhm.
someone like you and another person I'll name who I feel the same way about, Frank Miller, who's one of my favorite people in the world. He's another one who, doesn't have the thing, but fits, really fits because he's open and caring and loving um, and teachable, like you're talking about. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really interesting thing, and I, it's one of the things I like about you. Like, well, I mean, a lot of therapists out there, they don't even want to go near an alcoholic or a drug addict. They'll say, "I will not work with them." So to have someone who comes into this world and becomes a part of it and is open to learning from it, it takes something special, I think, to be able to do it as gracefully as you've done it. And, the other thing I'll say is, I'm a kid from Indiana, which is where I am now. I grew up in central Indiana. And as a young adult, had a sister in Jupiter, Florida, who'd been sober about a year. And she 12 stepped me, and I went through Hanley Hazelden. And I ended up eventually, as time went on, getting a job on the marketing staff at Hanley Hazelden, and I kind of handled the southeast region for Hazelden at large, placing ads and stuff like that. And yours is a name that I heard many times, but we didn't meet until one year at one of John Southworth's conferences, I think. But you're one of those guys who people
Yes.
would say, "Oh, Lee Pepper." Everybody knows Lee Pepper, but also you're someone who, when people say your name, they're happy. Even the thought of you, there's a positive energy that comes with it, and I think it just says a lot about you as a human being.
Well, I appreciate that, Tom. And I think that I learned that from my parents. And I think my father, instilled that in me. He was a career Army officer. And, one of the first things you learn, like I followed my dad's footsteps. He enlisted during the Vietnam era. Then he went to officer candidate school, got commissioned, and went active duty. And he encouraged me to do the same thing. And when you first show up to basic training, you have to approach people without judgment. And I think that's one of the biggest factors that we still fight today in this space is that a lot of people who aren't familiar or they approach it, they are coming at it with judgment, and that creates a lot of the problem and the stigma. And so it's the same way in the military. When you show up to basic training, you're the only one from your town, and all of a sudden you are now put with people from all walks of life, all colors, all races, all sexualities. All of a sudden, you better approach them without judgment because
Mm-hmm.
these are going to be the people that have your back. And that's something that a lot of people don't think about in the military, but it is very true. And I think that helped me as an early leader just reinforce that whenever you got a new team, when you're going to a new company, you have to approach things without judgment and give people
Mm-hmm.
some grace and some time.
I also want to say, we mentioned before we started recording my dear friend Jamie Vance, who just passed, and we worked together at a facility in the 2010s. I guess I don't. How do you say that? the not
I think you're
Yeah,
maybe 2010s.
2010s. Yeah, and and when he left there, he went to Foundations. And one of the reasons why he was attracted to it was because of the culture you're talking about. of
Mhm.
teaching and leadership. And, he benefited so much from that. And I think until the day he died, stayed in close touch with people who, it really transformed his life in an additional way just to his recovery. And it has sort of trickled down to me too, the things he has learned from you guys as someone who has supported me over the years, and just a wonderful human being. And so I'm going to be down there this weekend.
Okay, yeah. So
I'll
I'll see
see
you
you
on
on
Sunday.
Sunday.
Tom, what you're referring to is a technique that I talk about a lot in my book called commander's intent. And so somebody like Jamie could come into foundations because Nigel and I, because I think he reported directly to Nigel, Nigel and I were not always saying, here's the hierarchical linear way you're going to accomplish things. We're giving you our commander's intent. This is what we want to happen, but we've hired you to do the job. We trust you, and that you're going to figure it out. And that's an important concept. And a lot of people think in the military that they tell you how to do every single thing. And certainly in the military, there's a lot of training. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of, they give you a lot of resources. But when you're in the heat of battle or you're in a training exercise, there are things that come at you that are not
Mm-hmm.
planned. And you have to have the freedom of movement to exercise the commander's intent. You can't just say, well, we planned for this, so come hell or high water, we're going to do it. And then maybe that's how you get killed or overrun or something. And it's the same way in the corporate business, that you have to give your commander's intent, and you have to let people like Jamie come in and be innovative. Everybody wants to talk about, well, why is my team not innovative? And I always say, probably because you're micromanaging them to
Mm-hmm.
death. And that's what I hear a lot with millennials. A lot of my peers complain about millennials, but I love millennials. But you have to give them the freedom of movement. They will go and do great things for you, but you have to give them freedom of movement, and you have to back off and not micromanage. And I think that's why people like Jamie were successful at foundations. We had standards, and we had responsibility, and we had numbers, and we had goals we had to attain. But we were not micromanaging people to
Mm-hmm.
death, and we let people go out and be successful and have great careers.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of, the position I had before I went to work for Cumberland Heights. I was running a small facility for the owners, and this what you're talking about. It's very much a generational thing too. There's a generation, probably the generation just above yours, or maybe even part of the people in your generation, who want to lead with fear and intimidation and policies and procedures and all those things, and want to sort of micromanage like you're talking about. And it's an atmosphere of fear, and what doesn't come across is that you care about the person who you're working with. It
Yeah.
What comes across
Yeah.
is, this is a goal that has to be met, and if it's not, there's going to be hell to pay, that kind of thing. And one of the things I caught on to, helping create a small business and running a small business, was, first of all, we don't think of it as a creative endeavor, but it really is. It's a
Mhm.
living entity that starts from an idea. And, to have a boss who was like, we should have a procedure for this. And I would say, now we do. Now we do. Like, we're doing really well here. We're kicking ass. Like, we're not going to have all the procedures. We're learning along the way, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's to be expected. Let's live with it. And the other thing that I had a hard time with is, like, the guy everybody reported to, um, was, I understood, what lights the person up. Let's have them do that. Let's have them do the things they actually want to do, instead of
Mhm.
either you need to get this done 5 times a day or you're going to be out on your ass and we're going to hire somebody else. And it sort of aligns with the philosophy you're talking about. Any good leader knows to hire good people and let them do their job and get out of the way.
Yes.
And there was a,
Well, you would think.
well, I mean, any good leader, any real leader, there
Yeah.
are lots of managers out there who aren't really
Yeah.
leaders. And that's an important distinction, I think. So tell me about your book. What's the title? And
Yeah. So the title is called Never Outmatched. And of course, I have a copy. This is an advanced copy that I have, and that came from the publisher. And we proofread through this again. But Never Outmatched: Military Strategies to Lead, Innovate, and Win in the Modern Marketing Battlefield. And the reason I titled it that, Tom, is because so many people, when they call me for advice or consulting projects or what have you, they get wrapped up in tactics. And their first question is, how much should I be spending on paid search? Should I have a TikTok channel? Should I do Instagram? All these tactics. And I always try to refer them back to, what's the strategy? Like, the strategy will inform the tactics. And I break it down to this. When you're in the Army, you go to basic training. After your first few weeks, you go to the range and you start training with your M16. So we all learn how to shoot, but that one soldier knowing how to shoot and shoot well is not going to win you any battles. And I think that is the problem with some of our healthcare, behavioral healthcare today, is that people get FOMO and people get focused on tactics. And then they wonder why it's not paying dividends or working. It's because they've forgotten that there has to be an overall strategy. So my book, it's 12 chapters. Each chapter can be read independently. It doesn't have to be sequential. But each chapter lays out a different military strategy that I personally learned in the military and that I employed in corporate marketing. And what I did is these strategies I've translated them into mental models. And then in the book, I'll use the military historical example. I'll use my example, and then I'll have other examples of other companies and how it played out in their role. And I'm trying to make them very accessible because in today's military, less than 1% of the American population will serve in one of our militaries. And I don't say that as a judgment. That's just where we are as an all volunteer Army, and it's awesome. But that means 99% of Americans have never been exposed to some of these military strategies that I had the chance to learn as a young person. So that's why I wanted to write the book. And I think that these mental models that I've translated them to become very powerful for you in your growth as a leader, and in communicating with your C-suite, with your investors, because that was a struggle that we had everywhere I've been, was that you had other departments that want to weigh in. And I think they in general mean well, but sometimes they have a cognitive bias that I write a lot about in the book, and they think they know something that they really don't know. And if you don't fashion your strategy correctly, you're liable to have your department cut, to have things picked off, and that is one of the main reasons why I think most in behavioral health companies are unsuccessful. It's because they don't understand the whole strategy and they want to pick off little tactics. And I'll use a quick example for you. So when you're, I practice something called, force multiplication. And in it, it's how you can budget friendly start getting into all these different platforms. And there's a military strategy called the hammer and anvil. And what ends up happening is you have an anvil that's kind of like a piece that you're investing in. You're spending money, and that could be paid search or it could be SEO, but you're putting things in and it's holding your enemy in place. So the example I use in the book is in the first Gulf War. General Schwarzkopf employed this. He lined our troops up in Saudi Arabia along the border with Kuwait and Iraq. That forced Saddam Hussein to keep all of his forces there. Meanwhile, he had the 101st and 2nd AD sweep in. This big left hook, he called it. That was the hammer. And they came in and they just overran, outflanked them, and drove on to Baghdad.
And by the way, we watched it on live TV, and that was the first time anything like that happened.
What happens in the corporate world is other departments go, well, I just want to spend money on the hammer. Well, guess what? The hammer would not have worked if you weren't investing and holding the anvil. And so I use that because that way, hopefully, young leaders can understand that the strategy has to be there, or else you're going to fall prey to other departments or your finance team saying, well, I don't want to pay for this. I just want to pay for what's working. The hammer would have never worked if you hadn't invested and laid all those troops out as the anvil. So I use that as an example so that people can start to go, oh, wow, I can't just piecemeal things, because that happens almost every consulting project I've done since I retired. I'm the busiest retired person in America. But ever since I started consulting, that comes up every time. Well, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why do I need to do SEO? Why do I have to do this? That could be your anvil.
Interesting. And obviously I'm thinking of correlations between what you're talking about and what I do, which at this point in my career is private coaching for the most part. I do recovery coaching with people leaving treatment. I do what I call transitional coaching, often with people who are ending a marriage or stepping back into the world of romance for the first time in a long time, something like that. But also family coaching and which I sort of describe as an alternative to intervention. I have some intervention training. I never really wanted to do that. And a lot of families, they just need some support. They just need some coaching on how to get the person the help that they need. First of all, they're so emotionally invested, they don't have the perspective they need to make decisions effectively on their own. But, when you mentioned strategy, when I went to do my Facebook page for this business, the sort of stock photo that I chose for the cover was a chessboard. And somebody's like, well, why would you choose the chessboard? And because it's about strategy. You have to have a strategy for this. If you're going to get a loved one into treatment, you have to have some idea where you want them to go. And usually what I do with families, the first thing I tell them is stop talking about treatment until you have a plan. So when you get a yes, we can get them there immediately. Just simple strategy stuff. But the other thing I want to ask you about, how I want to know, like maybe how identity fits into all this. A few months ago, I encountered a new facility where I did a site visit, and another familiar name to you, I'm sure, is Mike Early. He's doing some consulting, and we ended up crossing paths. He did a site visit at this place about a week after I did. And so when I had a chance, we walked through another facility that this company owns together. And when I had a chance to talk to him privately, to talk about the first place, the addiction treatment facility that we both did a site visit, I said, what do you think? And he said, I don't think they know who they are yet. And I said, neither do I. That's immediately what I thought. They don't understand where they fit into the world, and they don't seem to have a strategy for that yet. They don't have an idea of where they want to fit. They're just going to kind of wing it and see where they end up landing. And we do that in life too. And one of the things I really loved about Jamie that you can say very definitively about is Jamie knew who he was. And a lot of people don't know who they are. And if I know who I am, I can know where I'm going. I can know the direction. If I know who I am, I know what I want. And a lot of us go through life, we don't know any of that stuff. We're just kind of winging it, doing what we think we're supposed to do and not directing our attention where it needs to be and to really be successful. And so what's your take on that, or any thoughts?
I see it like you, probably with this center. I see it very regularly. People want to get to the fun stuff. So people want to get to, well, I want to record the drone footage, or I want to build the website. And what invariably happens then, they really haven't done the hard work. And there is a correlation to recovery. Maybe everybody wants to get to the 12th step.
Yeah.
Do they want to do the work? And isn't it pain? And can it be painfully slow for some people? But wow, it's much more meaningful when you really are intentional. So I think that a lot of companies, they suffer from, they want to get to the good stuff. They want to get to the branding before they define who their identity is. And so how that plays out is I'll see, I'll see videos that are created that don't seem to have the right messaging, or, they'll have weird, like you mentioned, they'll have stock photos that don't match up. And so they really have, and doing the hard work doesn't necessarily mean it has to take a year, but you really have to define this, especially as you're hiring people, because if you haven't defined it, then as you start to layer on staff, and if they don't know, then all of a sudden they're creating assets for you that don't match up, or maybe they're creating treatment plans that don't follow the heart of the program's founders. And so I find the ones that really do well. I mean, I work with Judy Crane and John West down at the guest house, and see, they're very intentional. Like when you join the guest house, you know that you are going to be trained by Judy, and they are not going to release you to lead group unless you've gone through her program and read her book. And I think that a lot of our treatment programs and businesses in general could learn from that. To just, it doesn't mean slow down completely to a crawl, but you got to slow down and do some of the hard work so that you don't fall into the trap.
And one of the things I believe about leadership is that ultimately it becomes about replicating yourself in one way or the other. And you have to have some measure of fidelity to be able to do that, Another example that I encountered over the years, I sort of reached this crossroads in my career where I just wasn't going to take another full-time job at a facility. I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to begin doing stuff like this. But there was one place where I thought really highly of it. I felt like it was innovative. I knew they were doing great work. And I thought I could see myself doing business development for them. I would like to do that. And so I went to them and I met with them a couple times. And I knew, because I knew enough of their reps who they had scattered all over the country, none of them were saying the same thing, right? And so when I sat down with them once, I said, "What's your 30-second elevator pitch?" And he stumbled. And I said, "That's the problem. You have to have some key messages to start with. And everybody, at least to some degree, everybody conveying the same message about what you do. If you want it to permeate the market and really have a presence, you have to be able to do that."
Well, Tom, that's why I created, I have an online admissions training program. It's 42 lessons spread out over, a year. And I created it based on the training that we did at Foundations, with training that I created for the Meadows. And it was a similar problem. I've listened to over 10,000 phone calls in behavioral health in my career. And you would hear one counselor reply one way, another counselor reply another way. And all of a sudden it became a real opportunity to go, wow, we need to have some messaging around this. And we need to make sure that we have some consistency, because what happens is when you don't do that, people wonder why there's different acuity levels in a program. They wonder why their milieu is out of sync. It all starts up front. And if you're not willing to do the hard work and train your staff regularly in that, BD is the same way, that is what is producing some of these upheavals that you get from time to time.
Yeah. Well, and I've always been a word guy too, so that stuff really interests me. But there's a big difference between having an admissions department where somebody just uses their charm and says things however they say them, and then the next person does it a little bit differently. And like one of the things that comes to mind when I worked for Hazelden, the tagline was, "We can help. It's what we do." Simple little stuff like that, to know how to respond to questions, know what kind of tone to take. And we're really talking about teamwork.
When I was asked to, at Foundations, I was a CIO, was doing digital marketing. Then I became the CMO. We had BD alumni, and then they said, "Well, will you take over? Can we roll the call center into you too?" So absolutely. I'd never run a call center, but I started listening to calls. And that's where I remember interviewing. I interviewed all the staff. I remember interviewing one of our top ACs at the time. And I remember asking him, what's your process? He goes, oh, it's FUD, FUD, fear, urgency, and death. And so I was like, well, I'm not sure that fits in exactly with our dual diagnosis, but I at least gave him credit for at least having a strategy. And that really highlighted the lack of training. And so that's what gave us the pause to say, we have got to start investing, because if you don't, that's when things like that, because people are just going to create what they need to in the moment. And I find that a lot of places that I will go into to do a project with or something, it's not because they have poor hearts or they're not helping people. They just don't know what they don't know, and they assume, well, I hired Lee, so shouldn't he know what to do? And that's not the case. Like you do need to go in and the same thing with business development, like with your elevator pitch. Like I remember at Foundations, we would have contests, where people would give their elevator pitches and they could win prizes, and we could put some fun into it. But the whole goal was to make sure that we had a little bit of consistency and we were delivering the same message, and that it was appropriate, so that we're not getting, because that's the worst thing in our space that you've experienced, I'm sure too, is that you get this stress for heads in beds, and it happens at all levels. And it's, in my opinion, it's because of a lack of training and mentoring and leadership that a program falls into that.
I think the core philosophy of the agency a lot of times has a lot to do with it. I really am grateful that I started my career at Hazelden at the time that I did, and the people who trained me. And there was this little woman named Mary Stark who hired me. And when I got my first full-time job there, it was before they had an electronic medical record. So you've been to the Hanley campus. There's a building here and a building there. So I'm part of my job was running charts between buildings, paper charts. And she stopped me one time in the courtyard when I, on the way out of this multidisciplinary meeting. And she kind of grabbed me by the shoulders and said, if you're here to get rich, you're in the wrong business. Go sell cars. Go sell real estate. And we've both heard John Southworth say those kinds of things too.
Yes. Well, Tom, I wanted to tell you, I just posted on my LinkedIn, there's been a case that's just come up in the last 2 weeks where the Federal Trade Commission is finally going after some of these bad actors. And I'm not going to name the centers. You can Google it and go read the report yourself. But I don't think that a couple of the centers that were mentioned, I am going to give them grace and say, I bet when they started a few years ago that they didn't have that intent to cheat the marketplace, and they were doing impersonating, programs online. I think what happens is they create these programs and then things don't take off like they think. And all of a sudden they're in debt to the bank or to private, personal friends. And then next thing you know, they're kind of associated with some, hey, I could come in and do this for you, or I can get you calls. And next thing you know, it spins out of control. And that gets really back to your original question a few minutes ago about identity and taking the time to really do the hard work up front so you can avoid that. But I think that's what happens. And in the digital world, there are so many scammy things out there that can work for a short period of time. And now, I think that's what's happened in our space. Whenever you read the negative headlines, I don't think they started that way, but it just got out of hand when they weren't being somewhat successful.
Yeah, well, that reminds me of, I've spent a lot of my time working in like high-end transitional living. And I was really fortunate at one point in my career. I knew how to do it, but, to start a business like that, I didn't have the resources. But I got paired with someone who needed someone like me. And everything just fell into place. So I kind of had carte blanche to create this thing. But there was a business plan. There was a business manager. There were investors. We didn't have to worry about paying the electric bill. And most of the people who would open these places, they did. So when it came time to, am I going to accept this client or not? And we're talking about a client who, if I was really going to be ethical about it, I'd refer them somewhere else for whatever reason. But I have this electric bill due. And that's what ends up happening. People treat
Yeah.
people they shouldn't be treating, and they're doing it under duress, and they usually do mean really well. Everybody in this business wants to open their own treatment facility, right? Sometimes I'm really excited when I see people do it. Like I've seen Josh Foster recently. Awesome. Like he'll crush it. I know he will. And it'll be a great place.
Yeah.
But most people, it's like, don't have a strategy, don't have a way they're going to stand out in the marketplace. Think, oh, I can do this. Like it's like any other area of healthcare, and it's really not. And they don't have the sort of maybe the willingness to stick it out through the hard period before you actually start making some money. And so you have these investors that keep dumping this money in, and they lose steam. The investors and why they're investing in this is often really, really important. You know, if you're going to try to start something like this, it can make or break the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was at Foundations, when, we were with Sterling Partners in the beginning, they were very good partners. And then we sold to the Pritzkers because we needed, we had an opportunity to really grow. And, they were a family fund. And that was it was private equity, but it was family. And it was nice. They were hard. Like we had to meet our numbers, and we had to meet our responsibilities, what we committed. But it was very focused on what our mission was. Like, yeah, we're going to earn a good living, but we're also, how can we expand and help more people? And I think that sometimes in some private equity cases, things can get upside down and backwards really quickly. You always have to make sure that even in those relationships that you're being transformational, not just transactional, because a transaction will fail.
So where does being mission driven fit into all this?
Yeah, I think mission driven is great, but sometimes it's just an empty tagline. And I think that you have to be willing to put your money where your mouth is. So in the example of Foundations, we put our money where our mouth is. We created one of the very first social movements, Heroes in Recovery. Why did we do that? Because we wanted to be transformational. Now, I had the responsibility to make sure that the finance piece was taken care of, and that I had a way to quantify the relationships that we were making, and the lifetime value was making sense. But we committed to doing it. That was our mission, was to remove the stigma, and it was all based on our research and study of Betty Ford and what had happened with Susan G. Komen and breast cancer awareness. Because Betty Ford, before she came out and talked about her own problem with alcoholism in 1974, she was the first woman in 1972 to talk about breast cancer. And back then, the press didn't even say breast; they called it female cancer. So that was why we were looking at going, wow, look at where breast cancer awareness is in this country, but look at where addiction recovery is. And we're still so stigmatized. And we put our money where our mouth is. But I had to do the hard work of creating the budget so that our investors knew that as I was putting dollars into a social movement like Heroes in Recovery, that I was able to still have value on the back end as far as referrals and admissions. And I did that. And I think sometimes with mission driven, people want to abdicate their responsibility to make sure that there's a budget. And there's and I talk about it in the book. There are lots of ways to align mission driven to make sure that you're still taking care of your financial house, because you still have to pay employees, and you still have capital investments you have to make into your program. And I use a great example at La Paloma. We went there because they were having a census problem. And when the team and I got there and we started doing research and trying to understand what was going on, we realized that they weren't getting referrals anymore because the property was dilapidated. And I'm just giving you the short version. I go into more detail in the book. But we put together the business plan, right, to justify doing $1 million makeover. That then transform that property. They used to call it U-turns. People would show up in that driveway and they would U-turn and leave. They didn't want to get out because they were scared. They didn't feel safe in Memphis. And, there was a tattered flag and there was no grass, and the guard shack was not, had a broken gate, all these little things. And what happens is it's like the boiling frog syndrome for a lot of our programs. Like, we don't see it, we don't understand, but but outsiders can come in and say, hey, this could be a problem. So it was, but again, I could go in and tell our investors we have these problems, but I had to create the financial
Right.
model that made sense to them because they were super smart, where they would say, yeah, it's worth the investment.
It's interesting because the addiction treatment industry, what you're talking about, it's always been very mission driven. And in the beginning, especially to the extreme, like people giving away
Yeah.
treatment, not,
Yes.
having somebody from AA doing the books when they might not really be qualified. That kind of stuff happened a
Right.
lot. And, Hazelden was intentional for a period of time about really professionalizing the field.
Yeah.
And I think we're a lot further than we were when I started my career. Obviously, I think well, I'll give you an example. One thing I've seen when I first started in the field, there were a lot of counselors who had these state counseling certifications. Like I have one, I have an international counseling certification. It's not a master's degree. Well, insurance providers want, that they'll make that an excuse not to reimburse insurance. So that became a thing. So, aside from that wanting to professionalize and have every therapist has a master's degree. Well, one of the things you don't necessarily know about unless you're in this is a lot of master's programs. If you have a master's degree, the state certification agency for addiction will just give it to you. So then, but you don't necessarily have the addiction training. So they lost something there. There's a lot of, the professionalizing it. It slanted more mental health, more social work, less core addiction stuff, to where I've heard people say over the years, she's a great therapist. I'd send anybody to her as long as it's not about addiction. Yeah, she's the clinical director at an addiction treatment facility. It's kind of wild.
Yeah.
But, we see these patterns in life, where industries go through their ups and downs. And I want to talk about Ross Perot a little bit.
Sure.
It's interesting to me. I wanted him to be president. I mean, it was always apparent to me that we needed a third party of some kind to challenge the other two, because
Yes.
keep them honest. And I saw a video the other day where it was a debate where they were challenging him for not having political experience. And I mean, he was so folksy. What saddens me about this whole thing is he's kind of become a footnote in history when really he was a brilliant man and would have made the kind of president that a lot of people thought Donald Trump would make. But his response to this, you don't have political experience. And he said, well, yeah, if you ask me, if you give me a 10-minute problem, I'm not going to take 10 years to solve it. I don't have that experience, but I do know how to get things done.
And I think he also famously said, yeah, I don't have experience running up a $4 trillion debt.
Right. I mean,
which I kind of laugh at now that we're 22 trillion.
Gosh, yeah, he was so great. And, it's just kind of sad. And it always, I was so happy to hear it when I heard that you started your career with him, and
yeah.
What was that like?
I talk about it in the book. I mean, I learned a lot from him personally. I mean, being the youngest staffer, I mean, I had a lot of opportunities to be around him in my whole career at the campaign and at Pro Systems. And, one of the things I talk about in the book is you can't lead from spreadsheets. You have to lead from the front. And that's a lot of what I saw Ross doing personally. He was personally in the office. He was accessible, even to the lowest person on the totem pole, Lee Pepper. And so I could see that. And that's one of the things that influenced the way that I led at Foundations. If you were in the office at Foundations back in the day, we had a very open work environment before that became fashionable. We were all together, 30 people. I sat out there on the floor. And it was because I wanted the team to know that I was there with them. I had a different role. I had different responsibilities. And I do not subscribe to everybody does everything. But everybody saw that I'm in the trenches with them and that we were going to figure things out if we had problems. And that's how Ross was. Now, Ross had an office, but, Ross was in the cafeteria. He would just come in and maybe sit down at your table, or he was very accessible. And I think a lot of people, they refrain from that. But I think if Ross Perot can do it, I mean, great story when he sold EDS to General Motors, his first day up in Detroit, he parked in the employee parking lot. And they said, well, Mr. Perot, you can park in the executive lot. And he's like, no, I'm going to park back here. And he walked in. Well, all the GM executives hated that. And so I saw that very early on. It matched up with what my father had taught me about, one of the reasons why when I joined the military, I enlisted first. If you're going to lead people, you need to know what it's like to be led. And so I think Ross had that very similar, and that's why I was a good match in my career and learned a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's I guess my version of that is I drove a Zamboni for a while. That's one of those things that everybody is fascinated by and wishes they had the opportunity to do. I mean, obviously yours is a much cooler version of that, but you don't just meet people.
Zamboni's
you don't just meet
cool.
People who work for Ross Perot. I mean, and
there's not many of us left anymore.
I'm sure, but
I always joke, Tom, that maybe one of these days Ken Burns will do a special, and because I was the youngest one, I'll be the only one left, and I'll be there. I remember back in the day.
That would be a great episode of American Experience. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
And I'm a documentary nerd. I mean, I there's some of those, like his Civil War documentary I've watched over and over and over again. It's just, it's.
And I also probably have the largest collection of Ross Perot political buttons because I collect political buttons. So I always, even today, I'll be trolling on eBay looking for a Ross Perot because, back then everything was so decentralized. Every state had their own political buttons. And that's how I got known to the Perot organization in Dallas, just being a college student at UT in Knoxville, was, there was no centralized. If you wanted to create a Ross Perot button and a shirt and a bumper sticker, you had to make it yourself. So we went down to, I'm still friends with the printer, a guy named Dean Peters. And we said, we want to create Ross Perot. And we just did it. We raised our own money. And all of a sudden the people in Nashville started hearing that, hey, there's a bunch of people in Knoxville that have got something going. And so they sent a guy named Randy Campbell, who I'm still close friends with, over to investigate to make sure we weren't like stealing money or ripping people off. And because I had worked in politics, we were doing all the Federal Election Commission reports the correct way. And all of a sudden they got that back up the chain to Dallas. So you're not going to believe what these folks in Knoxville are doing. We had a campaign headquarters. We had our own swag. And that's really how Perot was. Like, he loved that story. That we didn't ask permission. We just got it done. He loved that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, even in the political world.
Yeah. And for me, like when I started this podcast, I just figured out how to do it, went on YouTube and thank God we have YouTube now. I mean, I would have figured it out anyway, somehow, read a gone to the library or whatever, but I've always kind of had that. I think it was my parents too, that figure it out. That was kind of the attitude, in
my garage, Tom, I fiddle around with antique cars, and in my garage I have a sign that says YouTube certified mechanic.
That's great. That's great. But one of the things, and I'm interested in your take on this, being a leadership expert. One of the reasons I backed off on this podcast for a while was because I didn't really have the money to pay somebody to do the production stuff. I was doing it all myself.
Mm-hmm.
When I first learned how to do some sound editing, I mean, my first goal was, I want this to sound legit. I don't want it to sound like it was recorded in a tin can. And I accomplished that. But then the more you learn, the more nuances you learn to filter things out, stuff like that. The more tricks you learn using the software. Also, the longer it takes you. if you're not a sound engineer, because you know what's wrong with it and you know what needs to be done to it. And I think sometimes that I've had to learn when to back off from that. And right now in my business, like I have somebody building a website for me now. Every other website I've done, I have built myself on Squarespace. I have a guy helping me set up a chart of accounts in QuickBooks, because although I've kept books before,
Mhm.
that's not, I could spend all day. I could pull my hair out. I'm not the
Yeah.
best person to do it. It's not the best way to use my time and my intellectual resources. So is that something that you talk about in your work with people?
Yeah, I think that there is a time and a place to where you can bootstrap things. I use the example of, when I first got at Foundations, it was just me, Sean Manis, and Sherry Carter. And then as we started to layer on new things using force multiplication as an example, when we wanted to do video, we hired Caleb McLaughlin. Could I have bought the equipment? Absolutely. Could have done it, but it was never going to. We started to layer in the experts. And the thing is, we only did it as we were able to financially afford it. And that's where I was fortunate that I had a pretty good head on my shoulders of building budgets and financial models so that we could quickly make sure that we were spinning things up. But same thing when we got into podcasting. We created Recovery Unscripted, one of the early podcasts in this space, and we hired David Condos, who was an audio engineer, musician from Belmont University, and he had a great voice and he knew how to do this. Because that was the same thing, like with you. Like if we're going to do it, let's make sure it looks legitimate. And the other thing I would tell you, Tom, and I heard this from Ross Perot personally, he said it in speeches all the time. When he had this idea to start selling mainframe time back in the 60s as a service, back then people bought mainframes. They had to spend a lot of money just to buy a mainframe. He had the idea to go to people and say, could I rent time on your mainframe at night so that smaller companies could have access? And there was a life insurance company that he had sold a mainframe when he worked at IBM to that took him up on it. It took him 72 visits back then to be able to sell his first contract. Most people don't give it 72. Most people give up. So like even today, when I'm sitting here, and I'm hawking my book and sharing my book, whenever I say, wow, I didn't quite get that order I thought I was going to get, or I didn't book that talk, I just always in my mind hear Ross saying 72, 72. And I always, my wife heard me say this, I haven't gotten to my 72. And I think it creates, like, for me, it gives me a smile. And then I realize that I got to keep pushing. And again, it's one of those correlations, Tom, with recovery. A lot of people think you're just going to go to recovery and you're just going to get the first time, or I sent you for 30 days, and they don't understand that it's not that easy. And the biggest thing you can do is try to make sure that person, whether it's in recovery or whether it's in the business, that don't lose confidence. And, one of the things that you were prepping me for on the call, one of the things that I use my wife a lot, because she's been with me we just celebrated 33 years of marriage. When I was complaining or things weren't going exactly the way I wanted them to, because not everything's been perfect in my life, she would be the first one to tell me, "You're not crazy, Lee. You're not crazy." That always put a smile on my face. I'm going to keep plugging away. I'm always watching the budget to make sure I'm not getting myself upside down. But I challenge the audience. Just when you think it's dark, have you made that 70-second phone call yet, or that 70-second visit, to get that first deal?
Well, for me, one of the things I've struggled with, just because sort of the atmosphere I grew up in and having some addiction in my world and family dysfunction, stuff like that, there's been a self-doubt that sometimes it's hard for me to put myself out there. And I have this resistance to asking, resistance to calling someone and say, "Hey, I could use a client," or whatever it is.
Yeah. Being vulnerable.
And,
yeah.
And, Jamie and I had this conversation about a year ago. And one of the things he said is people want to help. People want to help.
Yeah.
And the reason this interview is taking place is because I got a text message from you at about 6:30 one morning saying, "Hey, I got this book coming out. Please share it with your network." And it's like, Oh my God, Lee Pepper. I was happy to hear from you. And,
Yeah,
immediately I thought, well, I could share this on my Substack. I could share it on Instagram. And then I thought, why wouldn't I have him on the podcast? But you created an
yeah,
opportunity for yourself, as modest as it may be. Like I don't have a gazillion listeners, but you created something for yourself by just putting yourself out there. And if you wanted to be, you're a guy who's successful enough who could say to himself, I don't do that kind of stuff anymore. I pay other people to do that kind of
right.
stuff. But that's not who you are.
Yeah, I practice what I preach. I mean, every morning as part of my book launch strategy, every morning I go through and I'll do my phone for contacts, like with you. I'll go through my LinkedIn and I'll pick out 10 people. I'll do Facebook, I'll do 10 people. And that's just, it's almost like my daily meditation. And I'm reaching out with just a little quick note because I'm like you, Tom. I know that people do want to help me, but sometimes we're powerless to know how to help. And so I just make it easy. The easiest way you can help me, like in this book situation, is could you share it with your network? I'm not even asking you to buy it.
Right.
I'm just saying, could you share it with your network? And I know that certain people are going to buy it, but I know that there's a lot of allies out there. And I think that sometimes in business and in recovery, we're ashamed or we forget that we do have allies. And I think I write about this in the book that allies are so super important because allies are not quid pro quo. Allies are not like these, product partners that companies have where it's, well, I paid you. And so now you got, no, allies are there because they have the heart and the soul, and they do want to help you regardless of what they're going to get back out of it. They just believe in you. And so I think that's a super important recovery. And it's certainly something that's important to me as I'm out there hawking my books.
So, what would you say, Lee, is there a favorite experience that you've had in your career, especially like in the addiction space? Is there a particular story that comes to mind that you're just really grateful you got to be a part of? Or
Well, yeah, well, in the addiction space, I think I alluded to it earlier. It was meeting John Southworth. I mean, what a character John was. And John's been passed away now. I think, probably 2018. But boy, somebody that just took me under their wing, and he used to always have the nicest suite at the
yeah,
Breakers. Him and Rob had the two nicest suites. And he just invited me up to his suite one time just to say, "Who is Lee Pepper? What are you doing? I'm hearing all this about you. Tell me." And the next thing I know, he's like, "Lee, will you come to the 7 a.m. open meeting, tomorrow morning?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And it was pretty much probably like you and Jamie and others in your world. John was somebody that was a regular conversation on my phone, if not every week, every couple of weeks, and checking in. And I think that we all have, again, it gets back to the allies. I didn't pay John for anything. John didn't pay me for anything, but he was an ally. And I think that that's something that I've learned in the recovery space because so many people sponsor people and the sponsors change. And even if somebody relapses, they're right back to help you. And that's very unusual. I wouldn't say that happens in the corporate world, but it's something that I learned very quickly on with so many people that are just there out of the goodness, and they want to see you succeed at all different levels. And that's something that I try to bring to my corporate clients and corporate friends who aren't in recovery, to explain to them just how wonderful this space is and how I learned a
Mhm.
ton just from being around people like John and people like you and Jamie too.
It's interesting. When I was in the marketing department at Hanley Hazelden, it was when, really Michael Walsh kind of started that Vero Beach
Yes.
conference
Yeah.
with John Southworth and Boris Gonzalez. And really kind of the idea was to bring a bunch of interventionists together and just let treatment
Right.
facilities pitch to them so they didn't have to go do all these site visits. And it's become a semi-annual, at least, event every year. And it's as good as anytime I meet somebody who's launching a facility or something and they want to get themselves on the map, I talk to them about that conference. And,
Yeah.
I've met John probably around 2006. 2008, something like that. But really started to be around him a little bit, going to that conference regularly.
Yeah.
And then I had this job at a facility called Addison House as sort of a contractual program director for a while. And the guys who owned it, they wanted to get some training. And so what they ended up doing is signing on with John and Ken and Eric to do this
Yeah.
CCIM, clinical case management interventionist training. And, you know, I've been lucky. I've worked for some agencies that, why not do it? It's free. They're paying me to learn, you know. So I went through it, but probably what I appreciate most about it, besides just all the great people I met, was getting to spend some time around John Southworth at the end of his life and
Yeah.
getting to see what a, you know, warm and kind person he could be. And, you know, at the time, I mean, he knew I had a son, and he would say things to me like, give that kid a lot of love, you know, like just, and, you know, you don't hear that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's
Yep.
really, and it's kind of in this world that we're talking about, there's a warmth and a caring. And, you know, one of the things Jamie said to me a long time ago is, man, I love doing this. I get to hang out with all my friends that's kind of what
Yeah.
it feels like.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm really grateful for, aside from the, just the absolute professionals that I got to be groomed by early on in my career, just to be able to be exposed to people like you and so many wonderful people. It's just, I'm a kid from Kokomo, Indiana, you know, I mean, and you know, it's crazy. I think about this, the things that can happen to you in recovery. This transitional living facility that I was telling you about, that I ended up like putting my stamp on this thing. 2 years into it, Eric Clapton bought it. I mean, I worked
Wow.
for Eric Clapton
Yeah.
for because I got sober, really, and
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
listened to people and, you know, tried to do the next right thing and all that. I mean, it's just amazing. It's transformation, like you're talking
It's
about.
transformational. It's transformational over transactional every
Yeah,
single time.
yeah. So, okay, the last question:
Okay.
if you had to look back, I mean, you've had an extraordinarily interesting life from my perspective. And when you mentioned the cars, you're being pretty modest about that. I think you have a pretty cool car collection too, from what I've seen on Instagram over the years, if I remember right.
Yep.
But through all this, was there a particular time in your life when you needed a lot of support, or you could have used it, and, or, you know, challenging time? When was it? What was going on? And what would you go back and say to that younger Lee Pepper?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. One of the things, I don't think I put this, I wrote so much and then we had to chop up. So I'll have a second book if this one can be moderately successful. One of the things early on at Foundations, that first 6 months was tough. And I had just come from digital music, and I had people in digital music that were still coming back. Hey, Lee, could you come over and help and this and that? And I did a little side work, during that time because I was struggling to kind of make a path for myself at Foundations. Because, back then, everything wasn't right. We didn't have the right phone system and we didn't have the right metrics. And, I was still trying to put my stamp on things. And so I did a little side work, for some labels. And then I quickly realized that, I needed to stick this out. And again, I get back to it's a great metaphor for recovery. I needed to stick this out. There was no easy fix. The grass is not greener over here. And so I just redoubled my efforts. And that's one of the things that I talk about in my book. And that's why I called this book Never Outmatched. I committed myself at that point to never be outmatched, meaning I'm going to figure this out, whether I've got to go to YouTube and become a YouTube certified mechanic or figure out how to do podcasting. I'm going to figure this out. And so I had to work a lot of hours. I mentioned in the book, I used to get up at 6 a.m. when my second born had just been born, and I would take him so that Jennifer could sleep, and I would check Google Analytics every day, and I had a spreadsheet, and we'd log it. But I was committed to doing the work, and there was a lot of hours, and that's where my wife was so supportive, making sure that I was living what I was trying to do, and it paid off, in the end. And I see that today with a lot of young people. Like, you've got to. I'm not saying that you stick things out that people are treating you badly or, inappropriately, but business is going to be tough. It's not always easy, and I talk about it in the military. In the military, you're sometimes outnumbered. Sometimes the terrain is not conducive. The weather stops cooperating. You lose communications. You don't give up. And in the military, you can't just leave.
Right.
You can't just go switch sides or change companies. And so that's something that I took with me in my corporate career. I decided at that point, okay, wait a second. I need to refocus. I'm not going to be outmatched. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to see this through. And thank goodness I did. Because I think it successfully impacted not only my life, my family's life, but lots of other people that I think have learned from the way that we approach transformational marketing.
Well, to me, what I hear you talking about, I think about this a lot when I see like Instagram therapists and all these mental health buzzwords now that are used all over. And it feels like to me, there's a generation that they talk a lot about, I need to have boundaries, but they don't really understand what boundaries are. They talk about gaslighting. They talk about all these things that essentially end up being obstacles for them to stick with it. They have a reason to step away from something, when really the point of all this, whether it's addiction treatment or mental health treatment or whatever, is to tap into some resilience. We can go through difficult things and persevere, and not everything is going to be easy. I think about my son when he was really little. Anything new that he would do, what stands out is shooting baskets down the street at the neighbors. The first time he shot a basketball, he was probably 6 years old, and he didn't come close. And he said, I'm not good at that. And if no one was there to talk him through that, he might have never ever tried again. And to explain to him, no, things aren't easy right away. You got to keep going at it. Right. You got to keep, and eventually you'll get there. It's just the whole nothing good is easy.
I feel like I see this, Tom, playing out in college sports today. Everybody's jumping into the portal. And I wonder for these young people, like, what is that teaching you about sticking something out? I feel bad for the system, the way it's kind of set up. Not to derail our
no. I think it's
conversation
great. I agree.
But I do find that to be problematic.
One of the things I did years ago was cover high school sports for a couple different daily newspapers. So I've always, and for me, being an hour north of Indianapolis, watching the Indiana Pacers, this run they made this year has been captivating and inspiring. And what I think none of the talking heads really got, because everybody counted them out all year. Every playoff series, they were underdogs. They're a team. They went through all this last year. Yeah. They made it to the Eastern Conference last year and had were swept by the Celtics, but every game was close. But they're a team that played together and learned how to play together and went through things together. And that experience that they had losing in the finals last year propelled them to do what they're doing this year. And it saddens me about college sports because, I'll go to this other school and I'll get a better deal, NIL deal. And, and growing up watching Bob Knight coach, I mean, he had a lot of flaws, but they were teams. They played together,
Yeah.
and it was an
Yeah.
aberration for somebody to leave there and go to another school. And they had to sit out a year
Yeah.
before they
Yeah.
could play, if they could play.
Right.
And now it's just so easy. And I know that they're making some changes. I hope that they do something, because I think, I mean, the best employment experience I ever had was at Cumberland Heights. I mean, it just was.
Yeah.
And it felt like family. It felt like they really cared, because they did. And they put their money where their mouth was when it comes to scholarshiping
Absolutely.
people and all that kinds of stuff, more than any other agency like that I've ever been a part of. But I felt like part of something. I was part of a team. We were better together than we were alone. And it just one of the best training experiences I've ever had was Little League Baseball, because I had a great coach who said to me one year, you're a great third baseman. I know you love playing third base. We need a shortstop more. And I played shortstop. But you know what? And we practiced all the time, and we won all the time. People hated us for it. But it taught me how to be a member of a team. And a lot of people, it's missing a lot today. And I don't know. I mean, I could go on and on about social media, and I mean,
that'll be our next interview. We'll talk about college sports.
Yeah, selfies. I mean, I remember, not all that long ago, it seemed really crass and self-centered to take a selfie. It was like everybody was aghast because people were doing this on social media. And now it's almost like a requirement, if you have a social media account, that you show your face. And it's the world has just changed so much since the Ross Perot days. But listen, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
This has been great, Tom. Yeah. This has been really, I'm honored. I appreciate your time, and I love the conversation. You can definitely tell the journalistic bent you have.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I'm looking forward to seeing you. I'm sorry it's under such sad circumstances, but it will be nice to see a lot of old faces.
The Path to Authenticity is hosted and produced by me, Tom Gentry. All music is the work of the band Punk Rock Opera, whose songs are used with permission under a Creative Commons license. To learn more about me and my work, click the link in the show notes or visit tomgentry.com.
Running from death. Hey, we need a guitar player.